Monday night action going here. I'd like to welcome everyone. It's really, really wonderful to see you. We're live streaming as opposed to our class in Arlington. And before we start off with our meditation, first of all, I just want to say I'm very, very glad you're here. I was going to say, wanted to say it's nice to see you, but I'm assuming I know you're out there. A few reminders. Monday night at the Unitarian Church in Arlington, we have a mindful movement class before. We have era playing before my talk. And afterward, we have mindful dialogue led by Ray Manioka and Tara Cassidy. And if you'd like to take part in the full smorgasbord experience, you can check on my Facebook page. You'll see a link to mindful movement happening before. And thank you, Daniel, for leading tonight. And you'll also see the link for the mindful dialogue after, which is a great way just to connect, to reflect on the talk, and to share about your practice. A few other announcements before we start with meditation. We'll have we have a mailing list which goes out monthly and weekly for this class, and you can sign up on my website, which is jonathanfoust.com. Also, just to let you know that all of my talks are online on my podcast, which is available through all the ways you can get those. And also, this class is offered freely. The whole intention here, inspired by the practices, is that no one is ever denied access. So any donations you would like to make would be definitely appreciated for me and my lavish lifestyle, but also for the Insight Meditation Community of Washington, which is supporting this, as well as for the Unitarian Universalist Church in Arlington, which has been a sponsor of our class for many, many years. You can do this on PayPal, on Venmo. It's jonathanfoust@mac.com. Venmo, it's jonathanfoust4. And all that information is available on Facebook as well. If you have any topics you might want me to cover sometime in the coming weeks, please email me and let me know. I'd be happy to explore these. So we are going to start with a meditation, and then we'll be launching into our talk for tonight. So hopefully you have your cell phone set on stun, and we can begin to settle in for our meditation. So of course, posture is really important. You want to find a posture that's going to support you in being both relaxed and at the same time alert. And I think what we'll do tonight is we're going to start with a little exercise, a little contraction release exercise, a great way to kind of bring more attention and more awareness to your body. So if you like, you can close your eyes, and you might, with your eyes closed, just take in a few long and slow deep breaths. Honoring this is a time of transitioning from your focus on the outer world to bring more focus to the inner world. You might now take in a long, slow, deep inhalation and hold the breath. And then very gently relax on the out breath. And now, if you would, make your hands into fists and tighten up your fists so they're really, really tight. And inhale and hold the breath and focus on the contraction in your fists. Hold and squeeze, hold the breath. And then relax the palms. And take a few moments to soften and feel the palms, the fingers and thumbs, and the backs of the hands. Once again, tighten up your hands in the fists. Draw your shoulders up toward your ears, and now tighten up your fists, your forearms, your biceps, your triceps, the muscles around the shoulder blades, muscles around the shoulders. Squeeze the shoulders up nice and tight. Take in a long, deep inhalation and hold the breath. Feel the full contraction inside. And as you're ready, when it feels right for you, relax. Let the shoulders drop, open the palms, and just feel. Explore this pendulum swing from contraction back into a more open and relaxed place inside. One more time, we're going to move into a little fuller contraction. You can make your hands again into fists, tighten up the forearms, the biceps, the triceps, muscles around the shoulders, muscles around the shoulder blades. Draw the shoulders up toward your ears, draw your navel in toward your spine, inhale and hold the breath. And now pull all the muscles up toward the tip of your nose, turn your face into a raisin. No one's watching. Feel the full contraction. Focus inside. And now relax and release. Take a few moments here to sense what could let go or soften. You might find it helpful just for the few rounds of breath. Inhale slowly to the count of 4 and relax to the count of 4 on the exhalation. Again, inhale slowly to the count of 4 or maybe 5. Release the breath again to the count of 4 or 5. And as a way of gathering attention for these next few rounds of breath, match the length of the in-breath with the length of the out-breath. And you may begin to feel a sense of gathering, a more heightened awareness of here and now. Over the next few rounds of breath, is it possible to sharpen your concentration while at the same time relax and soften? And now you might relax all control of your breath. Let your breath be free-flowing and unrestricted. And you might perhaps just feel the imprint of these last few minutes of contraction, release, of concentration on breath, and now the release of the breath. We'll take some time now to deepen into a greater sense of intimacy in the felt sense of the body. You might feel your forehead smooth. Is it possible to soften or relax all the little muscles around your eyes? And can you feel all the little micro expressions of your face melting away? You might feel the inside of your mouth. Explore if you could relax your tongue and let it fill your lower jaw. Could you relax the root of your tongue down into your throat and simultaneously soften your jaw? Let the jaw hang a little bit from the skull. And feel the volume of your lips. And sensing now the back of the head and the base of the skull. The back of the neck and the tops of the shoulders. And can you feel or imagine the sinus cavities in your head? And the space inside your throat and trachea. And the space inside your lungs as you breathe. And can you feel the weight of your shoulders? And you might now just sense down the length and the weight of your arms, down through your elbows, down through your wrists, the backs of the hands, the palms, and the thumbs and fingers. And you might sense here, with the sensitivity of the fingers and palms and thumbs, as you relax and feel, can you sense any pulse or tingling or vibration or subtle energy here? And sensing the lower back and the buttocks, and the belly, the lower abdomen, and down through the floor of the pelvis. Can you feel the hip joints? And sensing now the weight and the volume of your legs as you sense from the hips down through the knees. The backs of the knees and the kneecaps, and down through the ankles. The tops of the feet and the toes. and the soles of the feet and the heels. And as you sense the whole of the body, is there anything now that could soften or relax or let go? Relaxed and at the same time alert. You might now draw your attention to an anchor or a focal point. One possible anchor might be the sense of the breath, and you might sense now where you feel the breath the most predominant inside. And you might choose for your anchor tonight the sounds, the real time sound vibrations as they're happening all around you. Another alternative may be to again visit the palms and fingers and thumbs with your awareness. And again, sense the aliveness here, pulse or tingling, vibration or subtle energy. Whatever anchor or focal point you choose for this meditation, whether it be breath or sound or the feeling in the palms, let this be your primary point of attention for this next period of time. The mind will naturally come in with commentary, but when you're aware of the mind not here, gently invite your attention back to the experience of breath or sound or this sense of aliveness in the palms and fingers and thumbs. When you wake up in a thought form far away, it's helpful to take your time. Take a moment to sense what it's like to let that thought go and to re-arrive. What could relax or soften right now? And from this place of relaxed presence, you can again engage with your anchor. Over the next few breaths, how intimately can you feel the breath on the inside? If your anchor is sound, how alive and awake can you be to the subtlest of sound vibrations? If your anchor is in the palms and fingers and thumbs, how subtly can you feel what is happening right now? And as you again and again re-arrive and receive the moment as it's happening, you may become more aware of foreground and background. The sense of the breath or sound or felt sense in the hands in the foreground, but in the background, a more refined sense of what's changing and shifting. And if it feels right for you, you might investigate this by letting the anchor in the foreground just soften or relax a little bit and be aware of all that is changing. You might imagine that awareness is like a mountain, and sensations and thoughts and moods and states are like weather systems passing by, and deeply relaxed and at the same time alert. And when the mind gets caught by a thought or a feeling or emotion, you can again begin again, relax and feel. Engage again with your anchor as a way of gathering your attention here and now. And then, if it feels right for you, widen and broaden your awareness to this sense of flow or the stream of your experience. And you might sense what it's like to let things be as they are. In these remaining minutes, you might refresh the practice again. What could relax or soften right now? The forehead smooth, relaxing the tongue, the belly, and soles of the feet. Palms of the hands. Relaxed and at the same time alert. Noticing how intimately you can feel all the details here at the point of your anchor. Breath or sound or feeling in the hands. And you might broaden and widen your awareness to the sense of all that is changing. And you might inquire in these remaining minutes, can you let it be? Deeply relaxed, at the same time alert and spacious and allowing. And you might inquire, is there anything right now that could soften or relax or let go? Is there anything that could relax or soften or let go even more than that? And you might now again bring your attention to your breath. And if it feels right for you, you might breathe in slowly to the count of 4 or 5. And exhale slowly to the count of 4 or 5. And for the next few rounds of breath, match the length of the in breath with the length of the out breath. And release all technique. Just relax and feel. and sensing the quality of presence, sensing what may have shifted over this last period of time of turning your attention inward. Letting your head drift a little bit to the left and right, sensing the movement from the inside. Take some time to stretch now. Feel free to relax or move in any way that feels good. Once again, or just reach your arms up overhead, stretch off to the left side, the right side. You lift your chin up toward the ceiling, let out any sounds. Oh. Smile like they do in the commercials when they wake up in the morning. One of the best state changers going. Welcome. Great to have you on the live stream. I see here that we've got folks from Japan and Nova Scotia, California, Oregon, Arizona, Florida, Michigan, and DMV. Is that the Department of Motor Vehicles? Well, welcome. It's good to have you here too. I'm really happy to have this time with you. I hope you are feeling truly well and safe. It's very clear that these are incredibly challenging times that we're in right now. And this is why we practice, really, to be fully present to what arises, to increase your capacity to respond to what's happening rather than to react to what's happening. And that's a little bit of what I'd like to talk about tonight. For the last few weeks, we've been talking about exploring the kind of the classical ways that we react to stress, how you react to life when it's not going the way you want it to. There's 5 mental states: reacting with anger, aversion, and ill will, or moving into craving, wanting, fantasy, disassociation, getting hijacked by worry and restlessness. And tonight we're going to talk about lethargy, classically known as sloth and torpor, which is always sounds like the name of a law firm to me. Good morning, Sloth and Torpor. Next week, we're going to explore doubt and self-criticism. But one place where we tend to struggle is sleepiness, kind of heaviness, the lethargy that sometimes is physical and sometimes is kind of psycho-emotional. So tonight, I'd like to talk about the arising of this state of sloth and torpor, a little bit on the cause, a little bit on how you can work with it, how you can release it, and a little bit on the long-term cure. When I went to my first month-long retreat at Spirit Rock Meditation Center out in California, a month long is a pretty long time, and I worked like crazy to clear the decks for 30 days, no outside interference, so a lot of work. And I was very, very excited. I've done a lot of retreats, but never a 30-day retreat. I was ready to rock, inspired, ready to kick some butt for awakened heart and mind. So at the beginning of the retreat, we're kind of all at the starting line, getting settled, getting the rules. You know how in drag races, they have these lights, like the lights flash down this color tree, and then suddenly you let off the brake and you press the accelerator. So right in the beginning of the retreat, time to go. And I was so excited. I felt like I needed a harness to keep me in my meditation cushion. And then time to start, dead engine. I had no energy. For the first 3 days of the retreat, I was experiencing what's called whiplash meditation, where you're trying your best, but you're just like that all day long, just slogging and kind of going in and out of hypnagogic states, kind of like dream-like states. And at times I was just slapping myself to stay awake, literally. It did clear. And then later it was pointed out to me that it's really quite common, particularly on meditation retreats. And I wish I'd been a little more understanding about the whole dynamic of how sloth and torpor and heaviness works. Because for me at that point, it was just purely physical. And I wonder, with all this going on, with all the stress happening in the world, have you been struggling with heaviness or sleepiness or mental fatigue? Or if you have a meditation practice, how much has it shown up in your practice? There are forces out there that just drain your vitality and they limit your effort. On the one hand, there's sloth, which is kind of the absence of physical vitality. That's the experience of heaviness, weakness, lethargy, feeling weary, feeling dull, feeling heavy. And then there's torpor, which is the lack of mental energy. That's kind of cloudiness. It's a mental dullness. A sense that you're just sort of like drifting through life. And sometimes it's so dense, like you don't even know you're caught in it because you're just so slogged out. It's sometimes described through some classic analogies. And one of them is like walking through mud up to your knees. It's just so heavy, such slow going. Another classic analogy, it's like looking into a bowl of water covered in algae. You can't see your face, you can't recognize yourself. And in this way, you can hardly even recognize what's going on because everything is so cloudy and so dull. It's also classically described as like being imprisoned in a dark cell. You're not aware of the light out there. All you can just be aware of is this small kind of dark space. I remember the first time I really felt it consciously was when I was a kid, just napping on the sofa, waking up from a nap, and just that sense of, I can't get up, just that heaviness. But it's an interesting thing. When you're caught in sloth and torpor and heaviness, it feels like it's permanent. It feels like you don't have any access to energy, but it doesn't mean that energy isn't there. It's just that you're not tapping into it. It's like a weather system. Sometimes maybe you're meditating or you're just working and you kind of feel some clouds coming in. First there were clear skies and then the front moves in and then suddenly a heavy, dark rain cloud is overhead and suddenly you are drooling. But it's not permanent and it can shift really, really quickly. A classic example. When kids are just sitting around with nothing to do, they're bored, I'm tired, there's nothing happening. Everything is just so slogged out. And then you say, hey, you want to get some ice cream and watch a movie? A profound and immediate energy shift, ready to go. And it's interesting that this is something we encounter every day, but on a longer meditation retreat, it becomes quite pronounced. And it's interesting how in interviews, when people are kind of exploring what's between them and feeling really clear, quite often they'll mention this as one of the main blocks, is they'll just feel this kind of heavy, slothful torpor. And I'll often ask this question: does it feel biological, or does it feel more psycho-emotional? I've been feeling slothful or torporful, if that's a word, or just tired or heavy, or you sort of feel that edge of kind of that depressive heaviness. Would you say for yourself, does it feel more physical or does it feel more emotional? When you experience this state, there are a few options. There can be a few causes. And quite often it's physical. You may be depleted, you may be overstimulated, you may be underslept. Sleep is a whole issue, and I'd like to do a separate talk on it at some point because it's a real point of interest for me because I struggled with this for a long time, and it's not uncommon that not getting rest is now more apparent to you when you examine sloth and torpor. It's important to really, really take a look at it. When you're chronically overstimulated or underslept or underrested, once you begin to really tune into your body, once your body kind of gets that you're really listening to it, it's going to give you information. And sometimes it's surprising when you suddenly you begin to realize how depleted you really are, how exhausted you really are. And quite often on long retreats, it becomes a struggle for many, many people. And I will often say to them, if you just slept all week and that's what your body needed, that could transform your life. Sometimes people ask permission to lie down on a meditation retreat, and that can get really dangerous when maybe you've noticed this if you meditate in groups and one person starts nodding off and they lie down, and it's like this virus in the room and people start dropping like redwoods all around them. But someone said, I really need to lie down, my back hurts, but don't worry, I don't fall asleep. And of course, they started snoring after a few minutes, and it got pretty, it, it got quite sonorous. And I went over to squeeze this person's foot, and when I got within 3 feet of them, they stopped. And I turned around and walked back to my cushion. Of course, they started again, and it became a really interesting dance. So physical exhaustion may be the root of your tiredness. But another thing that I always find interesting is that when you're sort of in that heavy, dense hypnagogic state, you may be experiencing a brainwave shift. And this becomes a really interesting part of the practice for me. Quite often when you meditate, your brain waves are going to shift from more of like a more linear, kind of rational aspect to the actual brain waves that are actually more akin to sleep. When you start moving down into the theta brain waves in your practice, they're so much like sleep because the subjective experience of sleep is spatial and temporal distortion, or time and space just fall away. You wake up and you ask yourself, I'm back, and what time is it? In that same way, in meditation, your perception of time and space can either fall away, get very, very distorted, and it can feel like you're right on that razor's edge of drifting off. And quite often what you need is just a little more energy. And we'll talk about this in a bit. A little more energy can kind of stabilize you in a really, really interesting place. So much of the art of meditation is about finding this balance, because you're exploring this balance of deep relaxation and alertness. And when it goes a little bit off, you're going to find yourself moving into more of a sleepful state, a little too relaxed. The alertness fades. Sometimes, of course, you can get a little bit grim, a little bit hypervigilant, and you kind of lose the relaxation part. So it's all about balance. And I love this poem because it speaks so beautifully to the balance that you're cultivating in meditation. It's called Fire. What makes a fire burn is space between the logs, a breathing space. Too much of a good thing. Too many logs packed in too tight can douse the flames almost as surely as a pail of water would. So building fires requires attention to the spaces in between as much as to the wood. When we are able to build open spaces in the same way we have learned to pile on the logs, then we can come to see how it is fuel and the absence of fuel together that makes fire possible. We only need to lay a log lightly from time to time. A fire grows simply because the space is there, with openings in which the flame that knows just how it wants to burn can find its way. So this is a delicate part of the practice. you are relaxing deeply and you're opening into alert wakefulness. And holding the simultaneity of those two it's quite a dance. That needle on that razor's edge moves back and forth. And sometimes when you're very, very relaxed, just a little bit more energy can bring in a quality of wakefulness that makes the practice really juicy. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. So it may have a purely physical cause. It may be a brainwave state shift that you're experiencing, but also the sense of sloth, torpor, heaviness, lethargy. It may have some kind of psycho-emotional roots. It can have a quality to it if you're feeling at all discouraged, or you're feeling the futility of it all. If there's sadness, if there's depression. Sometimes this sense of heaviness and torpor can be connected to like defeatist stories, the sense of I can't do this, or it's just too hard, it's too dangerous. Those emotions can definitely be a part of what's happening when you're examining this particular state. Sometimes there can be almost a sense of moving from overstimulation into being still. It can almost be a sense of crashing. Sometimes when you're feeling chronically tense and you begin to let go, there can be just this sense of falling into this sort of heaviness. Sometimes many people have reported that examining this heavy sloth, torpor, lethargy, that it can be connected in some way with a fear of emptiness. We try to fill our days frantically with things. And when you stop, it can be almost a little shock to the system. So we get into the nuance of this a little bit. There's something called sinking mind. You're balancing relaxation and tranquility in your meditation. And sometimes the tranquility and the relaxation, it takes over. And that's when you go into this meandering hypnagogic state, the dreamlike images. Sometimes they're very, very pleasant. It's very hard to rouse yourself. I know for myself, I've had times in my meditation practice when I'm often kind of like a dreamlike fantasy, and on some subtle level, I'm aware that I'm kind of in a dreamlike fantasy, and I'll think, you know what? I'm just going to go with this. It feels great. Sometimes in your meditation practice, there can be a sense of complacent mind, a sense of like, wow, my meditation's going well. I'm kind of on cruise control. I'm kind of in a zone, a little bit of a trancey space, but maybe I'm lacking some alertness and some vitality. It's easy to kind of get in that, like everything seems fine. I may not be as sharp as I could be, but I'm going to just sort of hang out in this comfy, soft, fuzzy zone. Another aspect of this particular experience and practice is a bored mind. Sometimes when there's this sense of heaviness or sloth and torpor, lethargy, a lot of people report that they're bored. They'll say there's just nothing going on. And what's interesting is that the truth is that there's a lot going on. It's just the absence of energy. You may not be tapping into the energy. And it actually becomes a very interesting thing. Boredom becomes a real interesting invitation to shift gears and begin to look more subtly at what's actually happening. And there can certainly sometimes be a certain aliveness when you realize, oh yes, wow, there are sounds, and you become aware of the subtlety of the sounds. And then suddenly there's more energy, there's more focus, and there's more absorption. Boredom is kind of the failure to pay attention, but it's also an invitation to shift to a deeper concentrated presence. So the sense of sinking mind, of complacent mind, of bored mind, these are all different aspects of what happens when this heaviness and lethargy comes over. But it's important to remember that, like all the weather systems of the mind and body, they're not you. You are the awareness of that state passing through. And you have the capacity to really explore it and be more intimate with it. So what do you do when you're caught in this state? So one aspect, if you choose to really investigate it, just a little story, someone on retreat was wanting to kind of explore this with me. They said, I'm just having these prolonged periods of dullness and heaviness. I can't really stay present. I keep drifting into these sort of like dream-like wispy qualities. So we engage in the practice of RAIN. And if you're not familiar with RAIN, R-A-I-N, R is to recognize or realize what's happening. The A is to ask if you can allow it or accept it. The I is to investigate, to really look closely at the internal experience. And then the N is to nourish what you find with loving presence, with kindness or compassion. So as she was describing the dullness, the heaviness, kind of the dream-like wispy nature of her mind, I asked if did she feel okay? Was she willing to take a deeper look at it? And she said, sure. And then suddenly she said, wow, I just felt like a surge of something inside. And it's interesting how sometimes when you say, yeah, I can be with this, sometimes it's like you're giving it permission to be seen and felt, and it can feel a little bit more alive inside, at least in this case. So we moved into the investigation. Now the investigation primarily is somatic, where we're sensing the experience on the inside. And I asked her to describe what she was feeling, and she described kind of a heaviness. She sort of felt like this wet, sodden, gray blanket kind of over her heart and her front of her torso. The sense of it just pulling her down. And she said, I just feel like I just want to go to sleep and hope it goes away. And so we kind of sat with that a little bit, kind of breathing into it. And I asked her if there was there some emotional component, some emotional word that could kind of describe this internal state as she was hanging out with it. And she said, well, I guess the word would be sadness. So I said, well, is that the right word? That's an important part of the investigation, because sometimes what you sense on the inside, you label it with the mind, but then you want to go back and check for resonance. Does that really match? And she said, well, it's interesting. I think that's the right word. I feel like I want to cry, but it's not really sadness. I said, well, why don't you just sense what's the right word? What word resonates and matches with that feeling? And she said, well, maybe it's grief. I said, well, does that feel like the right word? And she said, it's not quite. It's close, but it's not the right word. And again, she just sat with it for a long time. And she said, this is really weird, but this feels like anticipatory grief. Like everything's okay now, but I just have this feeling that it's not going to be, like something's going to happen. And when she could name that, something shifted inside for her a little bit. Like she saw it, that was it. It doesn't mean it went away, but it meant that it was seen. And so she explored the end part of this practice of RAIN, just bringing her hand to her heart and just sensing, letting it know that she was there, like she was comforting a child. And something for her began to shift. A little bit of a lightening, a little sense of like, here is something kind of below the line that I wasn't aware of before. This is the power and the potency of turning toward what's challenging in your experience. This acronym of RAIN can be enormously powerful. And I would say probably dealing with sloth and torpor and lethargy is one of the hardest things to investigate because it's so leaden and so muddy. But sometimes, not always, there can be some unseen, unfelt psycho-emotional quality that's connected to it. Just like some people are anger waiting to happen, some people are kind of sadness and depression waiting to happen. We have our own internal wiring. And so this line between what you're aware of and what you're not aware of, when you begin to slow down, begin to pay attention, you begin to sense what's below the line. And sometimes, not all the time, this sense of heaviness, of sleepiness, the mental fatigue, the physical fatigue, may be tied into some form of resistance. Something that's between you and really feeling free. And again, that resistance can be anger, aversion, judgment, blame. It can be disassociating by going into fantasy. It can be caught in an endless loop of worry and restlessness. And it may be connected to this sense of heaviness, lethargy, sloth, and torpor. Or may be connected to the paralyzing feeling of doubt and self-criticism. So what are some of the ways we can work with it? One way is just physical. Sometimes if you are practicing either in life or you're working at your desk and you're feeling really, really sloggy, or you're meditating, what you need is a little more energy. It's gone a little bit out of balance on the tranquility side, so you need a little bit of firepower to help you stabilize your attention. So sometimes just sitting a little straighter, breathing a little bit deeper. If the anchor in your concentration is on breath, sometimes you can turn your attention to sound, and it can be a little bit lighter and brighter, a little bit more stimulation. You can even open your eyes and again, bring in a little bit more energy. That might help to help you stabilize a little bit. It can be helpful to stand. If you've been on meditation retreats, it's quite often to see people simply standing at their chair, kind of waiting for the weather system of sloth and torpor to pass through. Going for a walk, moving energy. And personally, I love the practice of Raja Yoga, where you use physical movement and energizing breath to prepare you for meditation. And you may find that incorporating some movement, something that kind of really enlivens you and gets all the juices flowing before you sit, could be just the balance to support you and bring more of a sense of aliveness in your practice. And here's a really interesting thing. You ever notice how statues, like classical statues, like the thinker, where the thinker has their eyes turned down, or demonstrating sadness, have their eyes turned down, and all the ecstatic statues are looking up into the light. Sometimes this gets a little bit subtle, but I found this to be pretty true in my practice, that if you focus more on the lower body, like in the belly and the breath, it can sort of like pull your energy down, which can be very, very helpful when you want to get more grounded. But again, too much, you might find just sort of being more aware of the light and more aware of sound lifts your energy a little bit. And this may sound weird, but I know I'm not alone. I find the placement of my chin will have an effect on my energy. I notice if my chin is tilted down, I kind of sink a little bit. And if I lift my chin a little bit, I'll feel a little bit more lightness. So these are some of the ways that you can work on getting the balance between deeply relaxed and alert. But it may simply be that you need more rest. You're turning into the body's giving you feedback, and there's some inherent wisdom in the body that says, I need to repair, I need to shut down. And if that's so, is it possible to respond with kindness? It's not uncommon on long meditation retreats where people feel so disappointed in themselves, as I did on my retreat, by simply recognizing how depleted they are. And then it becomes a practice of kindness. I did an interesting practice for a good while, kind of inspired from the tradition which I came from earlier. And the practice it's fascinating. It's sincerely and deeply tuning into the presence of life force. And then for a predetermined amount of time, the practice is to listen to the energy and surrender to it. So I did this on a regular basis for a period of time just to see what happened. So for the next 45 minutes, I'm simply going to listen to this energetic wisdom of the body, of life force or prana, chi, ki, whatever you call it. And I'm just going to sense how it wants me to be with it. And for the first month, at least the first month, my body just wanted to lie there. And then later it wanted to move, and then it wanted to sit and be quiet. It was such a profound practice. What surprised me, though, was the deep level of exhaustion that I was carrying inside. And listening to my body and my body's need was really life-changing for me. So if you find yourself physically exhausted, is it possible to give yourself the space to allow your body to replenish, to fill your cup? It will honestly change everything. Ultimately, this is a practice of self-awareness and self-diagnosis. And the only person who can diagnose and recognize how to respond to what's happening in the moment is you. This is the awakening of the inner guru, of calling on wisdom and loving presence to sense, how does this moment want me to be with it? Remembering that if you find yourself with sloth and torpor and all the accompanying emotions that may possibly come with it, remembering that they're impermanent. Remembering that as you turn to really investigate them, you will learn more, you'll be able to see and feel that which was previously unseen and unfelt. And that could be transformational. Next week, we'll talk about doubt, and we'll talk about some strategies for that as well. But I'd like to talk a little bit more with the remaining time we have about the long-term strategy for becoming more awake in your life. I think as I have been practicing these years, I've become a little bit more self-aware, and I begin to notice a little bit more my relationship with these 5 mental states. I've noticed I'm more predisposed to some. One of my favorites is wanting, just lost in planning and fantasy, kind of building sandcastles in my mind and chasing shiny objects. I mentioned last week that my superpower was worry, and that when I'm under stress, my mind tends to kind of fixate and turn things over and over and over again. And we can certainly get attacked by all these 5 mental states at the same time. But it's an interesting thing just to reflect with anger, with craving, wanting, fantasy, with worry, sloth and torpor, and doubt. What would your predisposition be? When you're under stress, what is your habitual way of reacting when things don't go your way? It may not be clear, but it's an interesting reflection. How do you be with the difficulty when it arises? And for many, when we're caught in that resistance to life, the unskillful way is to resist it. We want to fight it on some level. We immediately think there's something wrong. There's something wrong with me. And quite often with this experience of sloth, torpor, and lethargy, we find ourselves cycling down into a spiral of weariness and discouragement and self-pity. But when you turn to investigate it, you're tapping into previously unfelt and unseen forces that can potentially open you to new possibilities. So the long-term antidote is calling on these two wings of practice, calling on wisdom to see it clearly. Can you honestly name what is happening? And just to let it know you see it, to name it, that can create a shift unto itself. The second wing is to call on loving presence. When you're caught in resistance and challenge, can you, if you bring a little kindness or compassion to this, how does it shift? If you can recognize that there's something inside here that needs and wants your attention, and if you can explore what it's like to turn toward it and just to be with it, it can be extraordinary. To sense what it might have to say to you. Another way of working with energy, this has been a helpful one for me, is to recognize this beautiful phrase that says, manage your energy, not your projects. That all of us have a peak when our energy is moving up. We have a valley when the energy is beginning to descend. And then we have our recovery, just the time when it's just time to let it all go. And been super helpful for me to recognize, so what are my periods of peak? And there I schedule my creative stuff. And the valley is a little more the administrative stuff. And when I'm in recovery, to not try and push, but to really let that be a time of true letting go and restoring. Well, there's an interesting thing just before we close. In these practices, there's something called the near enemies. They're states that look like the state, but not really. And sometimes the experience of sloth and torpor and lethargy, it can actually look like compassion. You know what it's like when you're so slogged out and there's something in your mind that's saying, you know, you've been working so hard. Why don't you take a break and just soften? That might be strategic, or it might be just simply a way of kind of staying on that slothful cycle. You know, we are going through such challenging times right now. I really think that we will look back at this event in our lives, and it'll be a marker for every one of us. Not that humanity hasn't gone through challenging times before, but I think now more than ever, we need to amp up self-awareness and self-care so you can be there for yourself and for other people in need. And not just with all these 5 states, but particularly with sloth and torpor, to be very, very aware of your energy. To really honor if you are physically depleted, now is the time to practice radical self-care. Can you manage your energy and build your immune system so you can stay strong for yourself and for others? And if there is some form of emotion that's connected to this sense of heaviness in your life, take time to slow down, to recognize it. Let it know you see it. And you might begin to sense, what is the unmet need here? Can you name the emotions that might be related to this? Can you sense what it needs so you can feel more whole? Can you in some way call on loving presence and sense what might shift or move or change in your experience? There's a great reading by Stephen Levine. We'll take these final minutes in a little meditation. If you like, you can close your eyes. And you might just sense in your own way, as you take 3 slow, deep breaths. Sensing the possibility of inner peace, of feeling safe, and feeling free of stress and suffering. Knowing that these clear skies, inevitably in different ways, are filled with different weather systems of anger, of wanting, of worry, of sloth, torpor, heaviness, and doubt. Recognizing the power of wisdom, the power to see clearly what it is, to name it, to recognize it. And the potency and the power of calling on loving presence. Reflecting on these words from Stephen Levine. If prayer would do it, I'd pray. If reading esteemed thinkers would do it, I'd be halfway through the patriarchs. If discourse would do it, I'd be sitting with His Holiness every moment he was free. If contemplation would do it, I'd have translated the periodic table to hermit poems, converting matter to spirit. If even fighting would do it, I'd already be a black belt. If anything other than love could do it, I've done it already and left the hardest for last. Just take a moment now, if you like, to close the eyes, to feel the breath. You might, in these final moments, bring into mind those who may be struggling now. And in your own way, wish them ease. Imagine them safe from inner and outer harm. And free from stress and suffering. May you feel safe. May you feel healthy. May your cup be full and overflowing so that you can savor this life and serve with an open heart. If you like, you can deepen your breath and open your eyes. Thank you so much for your time and attention. It's really wonderful to have this time with you. All the best to you. A reminder that if you'd like to join the Mindful Dialogue class with Ray and Tara, you can check that link on my Facebook page, and please feel free to join them. In the meantime, though, thank you so much, and thanks for tuning in. May you sleep well and sleep deep.